Welcome back. Now, as the B20 summit draws to a close, global business leaders have examined the obstacles holding back growth ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit tomorrow. Ray White sat down with Nonkululeko Nyembezi, the B20 South Africa co-chair, to unpack the major takeaways and whether B20 South Africa achieved what it set out to do. Here's that conversation.
You know, a lot, particularly our American colleagues who are obviously taking over from B20 South Africa, came and said, we're not going to do anything as close to what the South Africans have done. We feel overwhelmed and daunted. So actually, from where I sit, B20 South Africa has showed up exceptionally well and actually better than my expectations, both from the summit, which is the culmination of the year's work. But if you look at the quality of the papers that have been submitted, the crispness of the recommendations that have gone through to G20, and also how practical and pragmatic we've managed to keep literally above all of the turbulence that we've had to navigate through 2025. So I'm going to say to you, marking our own homework, of course, would give us a very big tick at navigating what was actually a challenging set of circumstances that we inherited.
Yeah. So if you look at the financial side of things, the finance, the infrastructure, yes, there are different task teams, but we're looking at South Africa's growth. We're looking, I think, 2.9%. That's the global average that they're expecting for G20 nations. How do we pick up growth for, say, South Africa, who's sitting at 1% and just can't get over that 1%?
So if one bifurcates those two into two separate types of answers. So B20 is all about focusing G20 government's attention on the obstacles to growth and what it will take, in fact, to propel the global economy to a higher trajectory. So we talk about, if we think infrastructure development is important, why is it not happening and what needs to happen? And we've got very, very grounded recommendations in order to do that. So for example, how do you make sure that you step through the entire value chain of infrastructure and fund it at preparation stage, fund it at construction, crowd in all kinds of different kinds of capital and blend it. So all of that actually is what we have been busy with. So I would think even on trade, on digital infrastructure, on energy, we've been very crisp about what needs to happen in order to propel the global economic growth, and on top of that, to make sure that the benefits wash through the economy. We don't really want to get back to a situation where only 1% of the globe gets richer and everybody else is folding their arms watching and wondering what happened. So that's one side. South Africa is a different proposition because the problems that initially need our attention are problems for us to solve, not for any kind of cross-border collaboration. So a big part of the reforms that the business community has been engaged with together with government is exactly pointing in that direction. And you're starting to see it starting to happen in the reforms that have been implemented over time. It's got, I think, the energy side, at least the generation side, down pat. There's more to come. So there's a lot for South Africa to do. There's much in the work of the B20 that can be applied to the solo South Africa view.
Sure.
But I think South Africa has got work to do for themselves.
A lot of people are going to say it's just a talk shop. It's just a talk shop. Everyone's going to go home and nothing's going to happen. But you, I would think, would definitely not agree with that.
Well, I think there's always going to be a big part of what is the output of a process like this, that then it's incumbent upon the individual countries, the individual business formations, the individual G20 constituents to do. So there is leakage. Let's be honest, because if you go back 10, 15 years in the B20 process, you may find very similar language from what we're saying today that was expressed 15 years ago. So there is a big part of that. But I think the bigger hurdle is that if challenges and problems get to a B20 level, It means they are complex, they are difficult, they are slow moving because there are very many moving parts that need to be factored in order to make progress. Therefore, I think the fact that nothing happens, at least not in the immediate term, is not something to lament. It's merely to note that we have to redouble the effort. We have to be actually very, very focused and resolute in attacking those problems. So infrastructure being one, right? So
that's a big one. That's a very big one.
That is a very, very big deal. AFCFTA is another. We have been championing AFCFTA, not because it's easy, not because the work is anywhere near complete, but because it's important and the logic of it is overwhelmingly good.
Something I'd like to talk about is cost of capital and blended finance. These are two terms that have come out as central themes at the B20. What are we looking for? Because your viewers are watching this interview saying, what's in it for me? I want to grow my SME, I want to grow my corporate. But cost of capital has always been a problem.
Cost of capital is a huge, huge issue. And it feels like in 2025 its moment came, right? Because the Finance and Infrastructure Task Team and the CEO of Standard Bank in particular has championed this right from the beginning of the year. And essentially the thesis is very, very simple. It says, we have taken, when I say we here, I'm not talking about B20, I'm talking about Standard Bank Group, took all of the variables that ratings agencies look at, ran it through and did analytics and compared it to other countries with a similar or worse set of metrics and said, well, what spews out is if we're being rated the same as those countries, we should be rated 4 notches above where we are today.
Correct.
Right? And so what is the missing link is, you can speculate, it is perception of risk. It's people's really received wisdom about the African continent and the risk thereof. So I guess the focus has been, folks, let's go back to fundamentals and let's rate Africa as it presents, not as we imagine it to present. Collided very nicely with the G20 pushing in the same direction, plus other members who have an interest in the topic. So I think we are making huge progress in this area.
Right.
I'm not going to claim the S&P upgrade last week is anything to do with this, but every bit helps, right?
So that's the interesting part. Now, business, B20 business. I would think a time like this is great to see your counterparts. It's great to have teams that get together, infrastructure, etc., or finance. But it's those side deals where you start making some money. The US can have its tariffs, but sometimes a company just speaks to a company.
A lot of these kinds of platforms are interesting for people for precisely that reason. So there is a lot of corridor type engagement. You just bump into somebody and suddenly a conversation gets sparked. So there is definitely a lot of that. Unfortunately, talking from a B20 co-chair perspective, that means people are not in the plenary when we want them to be in the plenary because they're doing bilaterals. But there's a lot of that happened. We had here, because it's the first time G20 and B20 has ever come to the African continent, we had literally people who have never set foot on the African continent saying, this is the first time I come to Africa, it's not the last. So just those connections are absolutely magic, and there is a lot of interest in global South-South type conversations as well. So a lot of the Asia and Asia Pacific type conversations like that. So you're absolutely right.
That was Nonkululeko Nyembezi, B20 South Africa co-chair.